Good afternoon, Patriots, and welcome to the 65th audio file in the audiocast series known as the Q News Patriot. I am the Q News Patriot. My name is SGAnon. It is extremely exciting to be coming to you today with this file. I know that it has been a little while since we've been together on air, and just know out there for each of you that have been so patient and gracious in awaiting this file's completion, I very much appreciate it. I am not sort of insulated or exempt, right, from the human experience that all of us are living. Life's happenings and life's journeys and life's moments continue to march forward and compel us into a continual unfolding and a continual becoming of who we really are and what this world is really supposed to be. So I thank you for that, and I thank you for your patience in this, and I hope that as we go through our file today, we can sort of paint the allegory of how we, the Patriots, finish this battle, move into the next phases, and begin the transformation, the true transformation of our world. Without further ado, everyone, let's get right to it. So for a while, we've discussed this idea of the Trump card concept coming out in the Q drops only one time in drop 2936. Drop 2936 comes out March the 3rd of 2019 and states at what point in the game do you play the Trump card? So we've had a spirited discussion, I think, for a while on what Q meant by the Trump card. Was the Trump card the presidential emergency action folder? Was the Trump card a number of the different executive orders that have happened, which have instituted a federal mission resilience continuity operation in the United States? Is the Trump card the 200 plus generals from the United States forces and worldwide forces as well that have come together to form essentially what amounts to a multinational, extraordinarily high clearance alliance? We have a lot of different theories and a lot of different discussions that have circulated, and it is worth noting that I think each of them has some element of validity, some reasonable basis, and so we have to practice very good wisdom and very good discernment. And I think given the events of the last primarily 6 to 7 months here in 2023, we can now say that the Trump card will in fact be the Trump trials of 2024. If we come over here, pardon me just a moment, Patriots. Come over here to the president's TruthSocial and go all of the way back to April of this year, April 18, 2023, as a matter of fact, at 11:55 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. President Trump released this truth. Get over here. I'm pleased to inform you that due to the great success of my previously launched digital trading cards, we are doing it again, Series 2, available right now. Go to collecttrumpcards.com, have fun. So we have an obvious communication, tying back to the Trump cards. In this truth, President Trump is holding what looks to be the Liberty Bell. And so, this is, I think, a very clear, compelling point to draw that the president is trying to communicate with us in some form. So if you come over to the Q boards and you come to drop 2936, where we were talking just a moment ago, again, released March the 3rd of 2019. At what stage in the game do you play the Trump card? 2 plus 9 plus 3 plus 6 comes out to 20. And on President Trump's TruthSocial, 4 plus 1 plus 8 plus 2 plus 2 plus 3, 4/18/2023, also adds up to 20. And here's what I found incredibly fascinating. On a 5-year delta from March the 3rd of 2019, we would arrive at March the 3rd of 2024. What is scheduled to begin the very next day? The Trump trial for election interference, and I believe it pertains to the January 6th phony insurrection case, right? In other words, we're going to bring to bear serious core election fraud issues. That's going to be the main focus of these trials. They're going to be live streamed to YouTube, which gives them a worldwide reach. Essentially, they amount to a weapon of mass destruction in the information warfare space. And we now have Trump attorneys announcing that they will use classified information. They will present formerly classified documents, right, that the former president would have had authority to declassify prior to his leaving office, and which very well could have been within the Mar-a-Lago safe that the FBI attempted to get into on 8/8 of 2022. But we're going to see classified documents to substantiate that not only was the 2020 election stolen from the rightful president of the United States in the public space, right, in the public optic, right, this actually occurred, but also the 2016 election, they attempted to steal it as well. I think we're going to see the Hussein Obama administration's complicity in all of this highlighted, the shadow government that Barack led during the Trump presidency that Q talked about a number of different times, right? The Trump card has the ability, the Trump trials has the ability to permanently erode and forever destroy the Five Eyes intelligence community's insulation as it pertains to the security narrative protection that they have in their own countries in their own spaces, right? When the English people realized that their English intelligence community participated not only in stealing a United States election, but has participated many times in disappointing and disempowering their own collective voice, it becomes a little bit more personal. And the same is true of the American population and the Germans and the French and everyone around, right? The Brazilian population, the Peruvian people. It has to come back, unfortunately, I think, in a great deal of cases and roost with us as human beings, as a civilization, before we are able to have that growth moment and then proceed forward in an organized and coordinated cooperative way. So the Trump trials stand to do this. And as a result, I think we're going to see a tremendous amount of desperation between now and then, and especially after the trials begin, as we begin to show categorically, empirically, unequivocally that the United States of America was usurped and assaulted not only by its domestic internal traitors, but with complicity from foreign governments who should traditionally be known as our allies. This is an incredible time to be alive, Patriots. We're witnessing the disempowerment. We're witnessing the full-on exposure and the collapse of the ability of the deep state to maintain the shadows that help to insulate their operations, right? The facades that help to create different public narrative egregores that occupy the mass consciousness as they get away lock, stock, and barrel behind the scenes with the most vile criminality imaginable. We're going to create history with these Trump trials. And I know that as we look at, the November season now and the December season and moving into 2024, a lot of patriots are getting very weary, and it's understandable. But this is where it gets really good. This is where the journey becomes so much sweeter, right? This is that last home stretch of the big race where a winner and a loser will be declared, and it is the most vigorous and it will be the most memorable as we go forward, right? We want to create a proper generational imprint, not only for our consciousness, but for the consciousness of our children and grandchildren as we move forward, which will help to guide our public record, our written and oral traditions, documentation, right, that we've taken and proofs that we've archived into the future. And this is compelling, I think, in a great regard, humanity to a much greater level, a much higher plane of existence with one another and with ourselves. And that is not without its difficulty. Just recently, we've seen an escalation of hostilities in the Middle East that threaten to spawn off essentially what amounts to a World War III. And we've talked about this on this program in files 63 and 64, that a worldwide warfare or conflict scenario of some sort is going to happen prior to this process's conclusion. We still have the Pacific Theater yet to pop off, but the Israel saved for last reference now actively happening in front of our faces, I believe, is the linchpin that begins that series of events, right? That domino effect that inevitably arrives at the Chinese reunification with the Taiwanese island, the island with the mainland, and a great deal of testing, a great deal of, we could call it maybe stress testing happening with the we the people relationships of the world as we look to sort of face down that gauntlet and run through it together. And this is how we highlight and draw out every last wretched criminal, every last cockroach that has come out of the woodwork, that could come out of the woodwork and do our Operation Harm as we go forward. And we have to acknowledge that amongst that process, we have a number of things that occur along the way that may not make sense at first, but that are actually very good for humanity as we go forward. The righting of territorial wrongs is an issue that we've discussed in this regard. The destruction of underground tunneling systems that are hundreds of years old and transcend many and nearly all political ideologies and affiliations in different geographic areas over a longitudinal period of time. We have to acknowledge that their taking out, their eradication and ceasing to exist is a positive, wonderful thing for humanity. And yet it may be difficult, it may be messy, and we may have different activities that have to occur here at the surface level in order to enable those sorts of opportunities to exist and to come into the fold. One of those things, unfortunately, I think, is going to be some sort of militarized attack on Washington, D.C. prior to the conclusion of these events. We have a number of different monuments in Washington, D.C. that essentially function as large-scale frequency warfare. If I can show each of you here with the Washington monument specifically, let me come over here, share my screen with you. Here we are. The Washington Monument is a structure that is 555 feet tall. It is an obelisk pyramid, right? The Osiris model, if we want to go back and trace the long-term sort of occult basis that this weapon really of mass destruction is built out of. But the monument has an overall resonant frequency of 0.3 hertz, right? This is the wavelength that the overall structure resonates at. And yet as you ascend towards the top, the very top of the monument actually arrives or clocks somewhere between 3 to 5 hertz, right? In its resonant frequency, its resonant vibrational speed. And so what does that create? Well, it creates an extraordinarily powerful frequency and wavelength suppression field beneath the top of that monument, right? And we're just over 500 feet. So you're talking about essentially what amounts to that lower basis of consciousness, right? That first tier of the atmosphere here in the world, which is heavily affected by what we do as we move and work and live along in this life journey. And that suppression field is emanated by the pyramidal shape of this object for a number of miles in every direction. So this is a horrible weapon of mind control. This is a horrible weapon of emotional field disruption. It is also a weapon that physiologically erodes the health of those that are inside that wavelength suppression field. And that field extends for many miles in every direction. So the idea that this monument and that other structures are not going are going to come out on the other side of this conflict still standing, I think, is a bit of a fool's errand, because why are we here? We're here fighting not only a kinetic war where we return territorial integrity and we right generational wrongs, but we also have to fight a kinetic war in the sense that there is a quantum basis for this warfare. There is a quantum basis for this espionage conflict that is happening around the world. 5G at one point in time was a hyper deadly weapon of mass destruction, for example, and it's only one of many different frequency weapons that have been shown out along in this process. And some of those structures that have been erected, especially in significant and key areas that affect a great deal of happenings, that guide a great deal of geopolitics and just sort of power dynamism throughout the world, they have to be removed so that we, the people, are able to imbue that area with our own consciousness, and to come into our fullest self, right? Where there is not a suppression field being generated, which will inevitably mess with the electrical or ritic field that the human body generates. And you can measure it on a number of different systems and a number of different spectrometers, right? So the idea then that these things have to happen, I think, makes a lot of sense when we consider that the actualization of the human spirit and the right to rule, right, and the competence to rule and the power that is needed to rule and the wisdom that is needed to rule, and I think the measuredness and the slowness to reaction, right, the wisdom that Solomon talks about, in the days of old, all of that has to be possible for the human being to really achieve in an appropriate, natural way, and that cannot happen when you have weapons like that monument and others that are still standing, especially in very significant pulpits of power around the world. And so this isn't, just sort of pie in the sky. I'd like to show that we actually have a little bit of corroboration, for this theory. We're going to come over here. If I can share my screen with you, and we'll see if this video will actually play. I hope that it will. But this is a gentleman who just a few days ago, I believe it was the 1st of November, traced a number of different U.S. military Gulfstream aircraft flying back and forth direct between Washington, D.C. on the eastern seaboard and central Colorado around Cheyenne Mountain. So here we go. We'll see if this can play. We'll see if we can get this to play, Patriots. Just one moment here.
Hey, what's up, guys? I just went live. I just want to show you guys. Since I was on live with you guys, here's 6 more flights. No, I'm sorry, 8 more flights right here. They have taken off. They are en route to Cheyenne Mountain to the Doomsday Bunker. There is a government, the Doomsday plane was taken off 45 minutes ago, and there is a command and control plane. See it over here? There is a nuclear command and control plane that just taxied and took off 22 minutes ago. So you guys, they're putting the government underground.
Absolutely remarkable. We sort of intuitively know that these sorts of events had to happen and that they were going to occur in this fashion. When we talk about Q Drop 34, for example, and the emergency alert deployment, we have to acknowledge that for utilization of a true military emergency alert, in the sense that it's not being utilized by black hat actors to foment a particular narrative, we would have to have grievous and calamitous cause for exactly that. We know that President Trump's multiple national emergencies are going to tie back into this. We know that the open border, the porous U.S. southern border, is going to tie back into this, right? And the events that are going to happen moving forward. We know that the involvement of extraordinarily large transnational lobbying groups that represent multi-citizenship interests are going to be highlighted out as problematic in this process and as contributing to the overall degradation and I think collapse of the national security situation in the United States of America. And we do want that, I think, in some regards, as crazy as that sounds, because in order to purge the corruption, we need the military to come in and we need some sort of reinforcement of our legal, we the people, law enforcement capabilities and powers under the constitutional Republican form of government, right? Not the corporate post-1871 system, but under the true Republican sovereign government here in the United States of America. We need that backing up to go through our communities with us, to highlight the good and the bad, and to truly have an administered election process where those representative of us can occupy all the important and necessary seats and levers of power in our nation. And that's a delicate and tenuous process. And to do so while avoiding open civil war in the United States of America is extremely, I think it's extremely difficult to do. This process has needed to awaken a tremendous amount of individuals, and many more will come as we go through the concluding events, because while we are awakening them, that is not the sole purpose for this period, right? The sole purpose in many regards is to end the hardcore physical infrastructure, the hardcore kinetic problems that exist here in the world, like the Washington Monument, like the different territorial discrepancies that we've talked about, like biological terrorism and the various dark, deep crime syndicate pathways and channels that get used to move those sorts of, smuggling, smuggled goods and things of that nature about in the world. All of that is a necessary component to the destruction process of the cabal. But to permanently destroy the mafia, to permanently disempower the ability of the beast to rise from the ashes in the minds and hearts of we the people must see clearly and must experience clearly exactly what they are about. Russia is no stranger to this. And as a matter of fact, that's why it's a great deal of why we've got the conflict in Ukraine, the conflict in Ukraine that we do. The Russians have not been quiet by any means for a number of years about the encroachment of NATO and Western powers upon their borders. They have not been, unclear in any regards about the activities of the post-2014 Ukrainian government as it pertained to ethnic Russians. They have very plainly supported the Donbass region. The the seizure of Crimea, when that occurred, through the different events post-2014 coup in the Ukraine, I think have sort of set up the fact that Russia has prepared for this for a long time, knowing that it was going to be a difficult and arduous journey, knowing that certain things had to occur in order for Russia to be safe, in order for the world to be safe. This wasn't just a threat to Russia, but it was a large portion, I think, of the genomic targeting and the bioterrorism, as well as the very high rate of kidnapping of different Russian civilians and especially children out of the southwest of the country, that spawned off, what has amounted to this really coming into 10 years at this point, if we count the 2014 coup, this back and forth that has occurred in that area. And Russia has, very, very compellingly made their point in the worldwide space that this is not something they are willing to concede or move from. And in fact, they are beginning to gain serious traction in the narrative minds of the rest of the world. And that traction is beginning to translate to populist support across many different theaters. Recently, we saw the Russians fly into Egypt and sort of puddle jump from Egypt over to the Gaza Strip to deliver humanitarian aid. What was not reported widely in the media and alt media space, save for a couple of individuals, was the fact that a large amount of gold was also transferred from the Russian Federation to the lawful Egyptian government in that area. And these humanitarian flights were again used as cover for that. The current encirclement of Avdiivka, which is going to be the next significant event in the Ukrainian war and is going to essentially set the groundwork, if you will, the foundation for the campaign on Kiev that is going to force the hands of NATO, is going to force the hands of the Zelensky and Ukrainian government. That encirclement is very nearly complete, and Ukrainians are retreating from the Avdiivka front as quickly as they can. Many of those that do not retreat are either destroyed in battle or surrender and desert to Russia. And as a matter of fact, the surrendering and the desertion is at such a high rate that Russia has deemed it more in their interests to simply have these individuals that come over to their side switch loyalties under penalty of death. And so the Russian army is actually growing directly as a result of the desertions happening from the Ukrainians with this Avdiivka campaign, and also really the campaign that's gone to the west of Bakhmut. This campaign is not going to slow down. Once we arrive at Avdiivka, which is a significant logistical junction, a significant home for different biological research and pathogenic laboratories, we're going to see a tremendous linking up, I think, of forces coming out of Belarus with the Russians, making for a push on Kiev. That, I think, is one of the reasons that we have different NATO militaries in Latvia and Estonia running what they call training exercises publicly, but which seem to be very, very sort of against the grain, right? Not against the grain, that's not the right word. Very serious, very significant, very intense sort of training exercises that we don't see in NATO cooperation forces much. And now we have different advertisement campaigns running with the U.S. Army, the French military, and others that essentially have ditched the diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we know that NATO's hand is being forced in this, and the Russians are waging a very sleuthful but very, very deliberate and powerful form of warfare that is causing a destabilization in the NATO bloc and their ability to collectively defend themselves. And they know that that is going to be questioned here very soon into the future. We've discussed the Baltic states a number of times on this program. The Baltic states ancestrally have been Russian. There have been territorial partitions, that have happened over the different decades and the different centuries, but much of that not at the behest of we the people occupying those ancestral lands, right? And then with the implementation of MK Ultra brainwashing, the control of the narrative and information complex, and infiltration of our governments and our religious institutions, we're able to then sort of warp, right, weaponize an entire subculture worth of mass consciousness against its own self. And that has occurred with tremendous success in the Eastern European blocks of countries, just as it has occurred with tremendous success in some regards here in North America and in other theaters around the world. Speaking of NATO, one of the most fascinating things with this is this Russian campaign on Kiev, sort of slated to coincide with the significant escalation of events happening in the Middle Eastern war. Turkey, in this Anon's estimation, is going to be the suicide note, the linchpin on which NATO runs on its own sword. Turkey being a member of NATO stands to be able to call upon the Article 5 Convention of Collective Self-Defense. But at the same time, we have a number of NATO nations that are essentially wholly aligned with the state of Israel, to the point where ministers, government agents, and even different military personnel from different militaries in the Western nations blocks have gone to the Israeli countryside just in the last 30 to 45 days. And we know that a number of Western militaries have been in the Eastern Mediterranean and in the Red Sea area for a number of weeks at this point. So acknowledging then that Turkey, being the de facto leader of the Sunni Muslim world, is going to be involved in the protection and the population integration, I think, of Gaza, the Palestinian people, population preservation with Gaza and the Palestinian people, and the potential for that to turn into a regional conflict, as I do believe that it will. We have an unsalvageable situation presented to NATO. If NATO gets involved on behalf of Turkey, NATO is maligning its own alignment, with the state of Israel, and with the idea that the state of Israel and the IDF need to have essentially unfettered access to defend themselves. And yet, if they do not, then they completely destroy the credibility of the bloc. It is an absolute no-win situation. And all of this while they have to worry about the very serious and physical reality of the Russian war machine, which has done nothing for the last 24 months but feed itself incredible amounts of protein, and really building strength and muscle, and disconnecting from the SWIFT system has helped a great deal in that. We have to acknowledge that this is an existential crisis, not just for the state of Israel as it pertains to the 1948, Nakba and the different things that occurred with the establishment of the Jewish state, but also with the NATO alliance ad nauseum, ad hoc as a whole. And we're looking at the disempowerment of the UN's military arm right before our very eyes. It is an absolute amazing time to be alive. And we have to acknowledge that during this time to be alive, one of the gifts that we are being granted is discernment. One of the gifts that we are being granted is the ability to intuit the things that are going to come our way, the ability to lean on that peace that surpasses all understanding, and to gain wisdom and to gain understanding with that wisdom, right? And all you're getting, get understanding. And that's exactly where we're, I think, headed as we the people, and we're sort of there in many regards and constantly evolving and adding to it, right? This is an expanding consciousness period of time in the world. It's very exciting, but it can be trepidatious, and it can be a bit difficult at times to remember that our discernment may tell us things that we don't necessarily appreciate hearing. One of the things I'd like to highlight is the idea that the military-industrial complex is not simply one side or the other. It's not simply a Marxist complex or a communist complex or a fascist complex, but is also a democracy, a drum for the democracy order, right? The spreading of democracy around the world, the containment policies of the military-industrial machine in the 20th century, right? The conservative American support of different states around the world, not just Israel, but other states as well. The military-industrial machine has a vested interest in ensuring that conflict is able to persist around the world, no matter what your personal lens is. And so as a result of that, they must appeal to the greatest amount of personal lenses. They must infiltrate the greatest variety of personal interpretations, right? They must transcend political divides in some regards. They have to appeal to higher senses in the human being, honor, nobility, self-defense, and things of this nature, right? Power, and the ability to speak softly but carry a big stick, all of which fundamentally are good concepts, but can be easily warped and weaponized against us. And we have to remember that that same industrial war machine, that same military intelligence complex, is not going to relinquish that control or allow us to discover how it pulls those levers very easily. So I thought it would help if we did a quick deep dive on the new Speaker of the House of Representatives, not to highlight out Mr. Johnson as being a good speaker or a bad speaker, but simply to appreciate that there are other angles which must be considered as we form our opinions and considerations about other people and different schools of thought and different political sides coming to the table, right? We have to inform ourselves to the greatest degree possible. And so I'm going to start over here, MikeJohnson.house.gov. Congressman Mike Johnson is a Republican member of Congress, proudly serving Louisiana's 4th District. He represents the nearly 760,000 residents of 16 parishes in the northwest and western regions of the state. He was first elected to the U.S. House in the 2016 election by the largest margin of victory in his region in more than 50 years. He is currently serving his 4th term in Congress. In January 21, Mike was elected by his colleagues to serve as vice chairman of the House Republican Conference, one of 7 elected leadership positions for Republicans. In November of 22, Mike was unanimously reelected to serve another term as vice chairman in the I apologize about that, in the 118th Congress. In this leadership role, Mike guides his Republican colleagues to fight for core conservative principles and values. He is also the deputy whip for the Congress to help implement the Republican agenda, and was previously honored to serve as chairman of the Republican Study Committee, the largest caucus of conservatives in Congress, known as the intellectual arsenal of conservatism in the House. So, at first glance, at first sounding, it sounds like a very nice, we the people man. He's conservative Christian values, traditional views on things like marriage and family. He seems to have a beautiful family and a very happy life. It is worth noting that Mr. Johnson did not vote to certify the 2020 election. As a matter of fact, he voted to not accept the results of the election. I think that is quite a testament, given the political pressure of the day. But we have to also acknowledge that the clubforgrowth.org issued a statement on October the 25th of 2023 that said, Club for Growth President David McIntosh says Mike Johnson was elected to Congress with the help of Club for Growth Action, and we are happy to see Republicans have selected a conservative speaker with a strong record as Republican Study Committee chairman. Now, Club for Growth, if you remember, is the same club that President Trump is not a huge fan of. As a matter of fact, if we come back to a speech that President Trump gave in Council Bluffs, Iowa, President Trump stated that DeSantis is a globalist sellout and Paul Ryan and Karl Rove acolyte who's in the pocket of Wall Street donors at the Club for No Growth. President Trump has highlighted out a number of times on his TruthSocial, especially earlier this year, that the Club for No Growth is essentially a Chinese-owned operation. That they are, dominated in many regards by political lobbying that is not in the best interests of we the people. And so we have to draw these connections, and we have to appreciate that this is an irregular war, that this is an espionage situation in the world, and that there are always multiple dimensions which must be considered. Once again, I'm not claiming one way or another that Mr. Johnson is good or bad. I am saying, however, that to appreciate the fullness of the flavor, we must have the entire pie. Coming over here, actually taken from The Intercept, November the 1st, Representative Mike Johnson's largest donor was the AI PAC. He's trying to cut free tax filing to send weapons to Israel. This is the title of the article. The American Israel Public Affairs Committee was the top donor to Representative Johnson during his most recent campaign, which was between 2021 and 2022. That particular committee is one of the largest political action groups in the United States, if not the largest, the only political action group boasting that their meetings have nearly as large of a bipartisan turnout as the State of the Union address. So it is worth noting that both sides are heavily lobbied, heavily controlled in some regards by this group. And you have to acknowledge that anytime financials, come into the mix, right, follow the money, a locus of control does change. It does have to be considered. There is a reason that the founding fathers placed bribery amongst other high crimes and misdemeanors, because the influence of money, the utilization of money as the vector by which we gain a higher standard of living or lose down to a lower standard of living here in the world, it will forever be at odds with the idea of altruism. And so if we come over actually to open secrets, when we talk about following the money, Mr. Johnson's most recent political campaign, 2021, 2022, the highest contributor being the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. But notable other contributors are going to be the Willis-Knighton Health System, which was in it for nearly $13,000 to that campaign, along with Broadmoor Consulting and Cason Timber and Cattle Company. If we break it down by industry, Mr. Johnson is funded primarily by oil and gas, healthcare professionals, and big crop production. Willis-Knighton, for example, Willis-Knighton Healthcare Systems actually has a page on their website that states the COVID-19 vaccines are safe. They're tested and monitored to make sure they don't cause problems. They can protect you and those around you. They can help stop the spread. So get a vaccine as soon as you can. For more information, talk to your doctor. And the CEO of Willis-Knighton Health Systems, a gentleman by the name of, let me get over here. What was his name? Jeff Felder II, CEO Jeff Felter II, is also the at-large trustee for the Louisiana Hospital Association, which develops and of course helps to implement policy in the same fashion that the School Board Association shapes and implements school board policy within the healthcare confines, the borders of the state of Louisiana. So this is not a statement that Mr. Johnson is good or bad. This is a statement that the financial entanglements behind the man and the different actions that we've now seen, right? One of the very first things that Mr. Johnson did as Speaker of the House was to send a number of billions of dollars over to Israel and to bring God back into the chamber. So we sort of have and on its face, some competing ideas, right? Bringing glory back to God and putting God, the creator, back into the House of Representatives, which is a categorically good thing, but also the expression perhaps of not having Americans' best interest at heart, which is a categorically questionable thing. Now, one of the things that is worth highlighting is all of this is occurring against the backdrop of an irregular military continuity of government operations. So what sort of highlights and takeaways can we pull from this? Well, we can pull from the idea, or excuse me, we can pull from the evidence that we now have that Mr. Johnson utilized a tremendous amount of funding of the IRS, monies that were earmarked for the IRS to achieve this Israeli foreign aid, which has now been sent overseas, right? So what happens when we remove the money from the coffers of the IRS system? We further bankrupt and further disempower and destroy the bureaucratic system. It truly is an irregular, unconventional, exciting, sometimes terrifying time to be alive. But we are categorically winning even when we are losing. And that, I think, is the beauty of this entire process. The more we win, the more we unite, the more that we show our true research capability as we the people, the more that we press ourselves forward, and press the narrative up against the glass, the more that we awaken mankind and move with one another in a coordinated, collective, unified fashion, the more that they struggle and strive to resist us. And even the manipulations of the old system and the machinations of the old system as they seek to self-perpetuate and self-preserve themselves, even they are not capable of overriding, of overcoming what God has ordained. This is an amazing, amazing time to be alive. And I am excited. I am elated to share this time with each of you. I know that's been a lot, Anons. I know that we've had quite a bit of discussion, and I know that some of this may seem like an up and down at different points along the way. Life is that way. Adaptability, flexibility, the willingness to acknowledge when adaptation is needed and to fluctuate and move and be agile, limber, and quick, not only in physicality, but in mind and spirit as well, is a major portion, I think, of the Great Awakening. We are flexing intangible, metaphysical, if we want to call it that. I call them intangible muscles, intangible sensory systems that we have not used in a very long time, if perhaps ever. For the first time, all around the world, humanity is waking up not only to the true nature of reality, but to the idea that there are multiple dimensions to a reality at any given point in time. And that our attention and focus, our direction and care, our work into one of those realities to bring the world to a better place actually does matter. We do have significant effect. We can bring about the world that we wish to see. But in order to do so, we must have the truth, and we must have complete and total understanding, complete alignment across the major issues that burden and vex mankind at this point in history, or that will not be a successful process. It is my great honor to share this journey with each of you. And I hope today, as you allow the breeze to flow through your hair, as you get out in the sun and appreciate its beaming rays on your skin, and as you listen to the laughter of your children flying through the house, driving you absolutely crazy while also satisfying something deep within your soul, I hope that you will remember that you are a spiritual light-based being. And this is an amazing journey that we are all on. I'll be back with each of you again soon. This is SGAnon. Take care, everyone. Thanks. Bye-bye.